This thing is beautiful. The GameCube is one of my favorite Nintendo consoles ever. There's so much to love about this thing. Everything from the design, the game library, the controller. It's reasons like this that the GameCube is one of my favorite Nintendo consoles, coming only second to the Nintendo Switch. Now you might think that with all this love I have for the GameCube that it was my childhood game console, but nope. I was frolicking over on the PS2 side of things. I didn't get my GameCube until many years after the console had already died. As I started becoming more and more interested in the history of Nintendo, I walked on over to my local used video game store and picked one up for $60 to see exactly what I had missed out on as a kid. And apparently, I missed out on quite a lot. My life could be so much better if I had had a GameCube as a child. I've concluded that any major problem I have today, including my crippling debt and the tumor growing in my skull, can probably be attributed to the fact that I lacked a healthy dose of Mario Golf Toadstool Tour in my childhood. I can feel my tumor getting smaller. After playing through, or at least trying, the highlights of the GameCube library, I can safely say that it's my second favorite Nintendo console. The GameCube was and still is a fantastic little system. So without further ado, let's take a look at what led up to the GameCube's creation, as well as things like its design, legacy, and especially, the game library of the console. As soon as the N64 was released, Nintendo was already hard at work developing their next console. On March 3rd, 1999, which was only one day after Sony casually announced the best-selling console in history, Nintendo mentioned their successor to the N64 for the first time. 2 months later, Howard Lincoln, the chairman of Nintendo of America, officially announced the console, which they decided to codename, are you ready for this? Nintendo Dolphin. For obvious reasons. I mean, none of Nintendo's codenames ever really made sense. They're probably made with the intention of not being relevant to the console at all to keep its functionality and capabilities a secret, but that didn't stop me from trying to find some connections between the name and the console. I thought that maybe the name Dolphin could be connected to a secret water resistance feature, but after experimentally waterboarding it, I can safely say it is not water resistant and it can no longer play Mario Golf, son of a bitch! Anyways, Nintendo didn't really say anything more about the console until more than a year later on August 24th, 2000, where the console was officially unveiled as the Nintendo GameCube. And people certainly had some thoughts. Hey Ma, you'll never guess what I just shot out! The GameCube got knocked on a lot back in the day for having a very toy-like design. I think people were mainly referring to the indigo color variant, which is objectively the best color, when they said stuff like this, because I think the black one looks pretty sleek. But the indigo does have a bit of a toy-like vibe. I think that the toy-like nature of the GameCube is what gives the design its charm. It's really cool to think that under the childlike exterior, it housed what was some serious power for the time. And contrary to popular belief, it was actually more powerful than the PS2 in a lot of ways. However, it was held back by one serious bottleneck, which we'll get into later. Because first we have to talk about the controller. This controller is awesome. It rivals the Xbox controller in my opinion. This one, obviously. This guy was a massive step up from the N64 controller. Gone were the days of a single, awkwardly placed joystick and a design where you had to grab different prongs to access different buttons, and in were the days of a standard two-thigh and twin-stick design. The new C-Stick replaces the old 4-button camera control setup of the N64 controller. 2 new face buttons make an appearance, being the X and Y buttons. The face button layout may look a little weird, but it actually makes a lot of sense. You'll be using the A button the most in a lot of games, so it's the largest and plopped right in the middle. The other buttons hover around it, so you have access to all the other buttons at once when resting your thumb on the A button. On the back of the controller, you'll see it now has 2 analog triggers and a single bumper on one side and one side only, because symmetry can go to hell. Also, the controller had rumble built in, which was something you had to get an accessory for on the N64 called the Rumble Pack. The controller also had a wireless variant called the Wavebird, which was a game changer back in the early 2000s. The one bad thing you could say about the GameCube was that the D-pad wasn't so hot, but that's something you could say about almost any D-pad ever made. Overall, very, very solid controller. Delving more into the design of the console itself, well, it certainly is a cube, that's for sure. One of the most intuitive and useful features of the GameCube's design is, in my opinion, the handle. This thing was great because it made it incredibly convenient for the times when you just want to tie a string to the end of it and turn your GameCube into a weapon. On the front of the console, you'll see that, just like the N64 before it, the GameCube featured 4 controller ports for up to 4 players to play locally. The Cube also features 2 memory card slots. This was the first and last time memory cards found their way onto a Nintendo system, if you don't count using memory cards on the Wii to play GameCube games. Since hard drives weren't a thing yet on Nintendo consoles, memory cards were required if you wanted to save your game's progress, as save data can only be saved to cartridges and not discs. On the bottom of the console, you'll find 3 extra ports so you can plug in things like the GBA player or the broadband adapter to give you internet access. Finally, more ports to stick my fork into! Now that we got all that out of the way, we need to talk about the Achilles heel of the GameCube's design. You see, unlike other consoles that use DVDs for their games, Nintendo decided to pull a classic Nintendo move and use mini DVDs to hold their games. Now this was an issue for several reasons. For one, it meant you were unable to watch DVDs on the GameCube because it was physically impossible to put a DVD inside. And watching DVDs was a major selling point of consoles like the PS2. Most kids were able to convince their parents to buy a PS2 when they told them it functioned as a DVD player, which would cost anywhere from $700 to over $1,000 back in the day. Being able to watch TV shows and movies would have helped a lot in driving GameCube sales. The other and more significant issue with using mini DVDs was because the storage capacity of mini DVDs was much smaller than that of regular DVDs. The GameCube's mini DVD could hold roughly 1.5 gigabytes of data, while DVDs could hold up to 8.5 gigabytes of data on a double-layered disc. This is why third-party developers flocked to other consoles to make games. The only way they could get their games running on the GameCube would be to make games that are smaller in scale or to seriously downgrade the graphical fidelity so it could fit on a 1.5 gigabyte disc. That meant that games like GTA 3 would end up looking something like this. It just made more sense to stick to PS2 and Xbox to develop games. Third-party support was scarce on the GameCube. The only way to save the system from completely failing would be to make up for it with amazing first-party support. And luckily, Nintendo really delivered here. The GameCube has one of the best libraries of any Nintendo console. Almost every one of Nintendo's major IPs got an entry on the console. Many fans love the games on this system, as we can see by the price of Pokemon Box for the GameCube. Some of the entries were controversial for the time, but most people now look back on these games fondly. Let's go down the list of the GameCube's highlight titles, shall we? If you can get past Super Mario Sunshine's wonky controls and random difficulty spikes, it is a really cool and original 3D Mario that really stands out from the rest. The Flood Pack was a really interesting new mechanic that opened up a ton of new platforming possibilities. The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker caught some serious heat back in the day for its different art style, but is now adored by most Zelda fans, many claiming it to be their favorite. And then there's Mario Kart Double Dash, another standout title in its series, except this time, people loved it even back when it was released. The 2 racer per kart setup is something that no other Mario Kart has done yet, and even though new entries in the series add more characters, tracks, modes, mechanics, many will still say Double Dash is their favorite because of its exclusive mechanic. Paper Mario was another series present on the GameCube. Most Paper Mario fans will tell you that the series peaked on the GameCube with Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. If you're a Nintendo fan that likes to poke around online, you've likely heard of all the controversy surrounding the newer entries of the game. Thousand-Year Door was a Paper Mario done right in the eyes of many. Luigi's Mansion was an interesting new Mario game because not only do you play as Mario's hot little brother instead of Mario, but they used it as a launch title for the system. This was the first time ever a Nintendo console was launched without a mainline Mario game, and it was pretty cool to see. On top of just being a really good game, Luigi's Mansion did a great job showcasing the GameCube's new graphical capabilities. Character models were way smoother than on the N64, and using a flashlight in a dark mansion was a great way of showing all the fancy new lighting effects brought to you by the GameCube. Mario sports games were in full swing on the GameCube. Mario Tennis, Mario Baseball, Mario Strikers, Mario Golf were all present on the console. Sure, they might not be the deepest games ever, but they're still some solid fun. Mario Golf in particular is great, because not only did it shrink my tumor, it also improved my golf swing. These games are like junk food games. They're not necessarily the most quality titles out there, but they're a lot of fun to kick back with and indulge in with friends. Another series good with this idea is Mario Party. It sure was present on the GameCube, as the system had 4 of them. Now personally, I don't own any of the GameCube Mario parties because, for whatever reason, people are treating them like they're the rarest substance on Earth. They are not. Just like the Mario sports games, they're good games to just kick back with and enjoy with friends. And you would be surprised by how intense and competitive these games can get. Another game we have to talk about that's arguably less intense than Mario Party is Super Smash Bros. Melee. This one was crazy popular on the GameCube, and it's actually the best-selling title on the system. Melee is another one of those titles where even though newer entries of the series had a ton of new characters, stages, modes, this one continues to be a lot of people's favorite and is still played competitively today. The last games we have to talk about are the game series that made their debut on the system. Animal Crossing first made its way to North America on the GameCube, meaning Americans were finally able to be verbally harassed by Rossetti in all his polygonal beauty. Animal Crossing first released in Japan on the N64 in the form of Animal Forest in 2001, but later in the year, when it was localized for North America, the name was changed to Animal Crossing. Animal Crossing is a life simulation game where you're dropped off in a peaceful village filled with anthropomorphic animals. In this game, the player gets a chance to escape the real world by instantly going into debt upon entry and basically gets to be a slave in the working class by working for a man born richer than them. Outside of that, there isn't really a final goal in Animal Crossing. You just kinda walk around, chat with villagers, do favors for them, catch bugs, go fishing, pay off your debt, decorate your house, assault local wildlife. It's a very fun and peaceful game, but I'm really surprised by how much traction this game got. I thought that its slow, simple, and sometimes tedious gameplay would deter a lot of people, but apparently it didn't, as the latest entry in the series, New Horizons, is currently the second best-selling game on the Switch. I guess people just can't get enough of this. The last 2 game series that made their debut on the GameCube are Pikmin and Metroid Prime, and these games do not get nearly the amount of attention they deserve. Pikmin was a completely new franchise where you play as a very small man named Olimar and crash land on a mysterious planet inhabited by these adorable little creatures called Pikmin. Olimar naturally enslaves them and uses them to his aid while exploring the planet. They are used to kill enemies, break down walls, gather resources, build bridges, etc., etc. Pikmin 1 and 2 were released on the GameCube, and Pikmin 3 was released 9 years later on the Wii U. Pikmin 4 was confirmed by Shigeru Miyamoto to be very close to completion back in 2015. The year is 2021, and it still isn't out. Pikmin 3 came out in 2013, so Pikmin 4 has been MIA for about 8 years now, so here's hoping it turns up eventually. And then there's Metroid Prime, an incredible series that could easily be way more successful if Nintendo actually cared. Like Pikmin, not many people have experienced the beauty of Metroid Prime, but the people that did play it absolutely loved it. The Metroid franchise started off as a 2D side-scroller on the NES and SNES. Nintendo later did something very ballsy and handed the series off to Western developer Retro Studios, who turned it into a first-person shooter, and the risk really paid off. Reception for these new games was fantastic. Critics and the few other people who played it adored this series. Metroid Prime unfortunately didn't take off like it should have, likely because it got its start on a not-so-successful system. And that pretty much covers all the highlights of the GameCube's library. There were plenty of other games that were released on the system like Kirby's Air Ride and Chibi Robo, but it would be impossible to cover every single one of them. All of these games add up to what is one of the best libraries on any Nintendo system. The GameCube, despite not being the greatest success ever, is still remembered fondly by Nintendo fans everywhere. I think that everything from the stellar library, the power of the system, the controller, and everything else people love about the system add up to a greater reason people always gush over the GameCube. The era of the GameCube shows a prime example of when Nintendo was solely focused on making a no-nonsense video game console with a no-nonsense controller that just played good quality Nintendo games with a console powerful enough to go toe-to-toe with the competition. Now don't take that as me knocking on the Wii and Wii U, I freaking love those two systems. Especially the Wii, because early models of the Wii had GameCube backwards compatibility, so there was no point in keeping your GameCube after that. Other than to display it on a shelf like a dork, but no one does that. But anyway, yeah, the Wii and Wii U were cool, and there was a lot to like about them, but there's something special about the days where Nintendo just tried to focus on making big, awesome first-party games for a powerful system with a normal controller. Around 15 years later, Nintendo took this philosophy, did some tweaking, and created the Switch. Now sure, it's still pretty underpowered compared to the competition, but the whole home/portable hybrid system more than makes up for it. And they still just concentrate on making a game system that focuses on playing games, which is refreshing coming out of the Wii and Wii U generation. The GameCube will always be looked back at warmly for reasons like this, especially in these times. Thanks, all my loyal fans, for watching. See you later.